The conjunction of events that led to your reading this book appear unfathomably improbable. Indeed, if you're familiar with the conjunctive fallacy, you understand that this conjunction of events is statistically less probable than the formation of a life-supporting universe.
Hell was invented by people who had no patience with dissent and no qualms about committing atrocities. It was not invented by people fit to be our moral arbiters. Hell is what you get when religion is seen as both indefensible and indispensable.
Many Jews, Muslims, and Seventh-day Adventists regard the eating of pork as offensive, whereas a Southern Baptist will gobble pork barbecue with the table manners of an alligator.
William Lane Craig says increasing the mass of neutrinos, the most numerous particles of any mass in the universe, from 5 times 10 to the 34th to 5 times 10 to the 35th kilograms would cause the universe to contract rather than expand. He intones this as though it is a trivially small adjustment, but readers familiar with scientific notation recognize this as a tenfold increase. One small tweak for Craig, one giant leap for the universe. If Earth's mass were equivalently increased, a person who weighs 150 pounds would suddenly weigh 323 pounds. Buildings would crumble under their own weight. Flowers would bend over to kiss the ground. Hummingbirds, unable to get airborne, would waddle around in the sluggish way that Aunt Fergie does.
Champions of the design argument are inspired by the harmonious economy of nature. The sun draws moisture from the sea, then breezes carry the moisture over land, where it descends as rain and is swept through river channels back to the sea. Flies are eaten by frogs, which are eaten by snakes, which are eaten by raptors, which upon death are eaten by flies. Theologians gazing upon these teleonomic cycles perceive the skilled touch of the Almighty. They see design. The frog, as it is being swallowed by the snake, may be mindful of particular imperfections in the design, but no frog has ever pressed the issue, presumably because frogs are too busy either evading snakes or being digested.
An evolution denier may be able to wire up a computer network, run a large corporation, or perform CPR on a drowned cat. But such a scientifically uninformed person is handicapped when it comes to deep philosophical or religious questions.
When prayer fails, believers invent cutesy rationalizations such as, God always answers prayer, but sometimes the answer is no. That contradicts what Jesus said in Matthew 21:22. Whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer, believing ye shall receive. Jodi Picoult wrote, it was possible that a miracle was not something that happened to you, but rather something that didn't. We are apparently to be impressed when an unobservable God performs unobservable miracles when not asked.
Critics unqualified to appraise the merit of their opponent's ideas tend to dwell on and exaggerate their opponent's misconduct, as though it were enough to say that one's opponents are bad without demonstrating that they are wrong. An approach that substitutes recrimination and name-calling for sound reasoning is not helpful toward discovering the truth. Anyone who can't stand to have his or her most cherished beliefs criticized is temperamentally unsuited for life in a free society. Living organisms are blind to the awesome dynamism of the inanimate realm. We cling to Earth like flecks of dust on the back of a rampaging rhino, while we confide smugly to one another, matter is inert, the animal spirit rules all. Spirit rules all? Here we catch a whiff of the fetid brain fart, continuously vented from the bowels of religion. Those who avow that matter is inert, that it does nothing interesting, should reflect on the fact that matter, if allotted 13.8 billion years to fill, morphs into a scuttling trilobite, a neon yellow autumn leaf, a crackling bolt of lightning, a roaring T-Rex, and a cooing human baby.
Apologists stress that miracles are possible. Historians, however, do not focus on questions of logical or physical possibility. The goal of a historian is comparatively circumspect, namely the appraisal of probabilities in light of extant evidence. The evidence is interpreted within the context of uniform natural laws. A historian who studies ancient manuscripts and other artifacts relies on the uniformity of nature as surely as does a physicist, geologist, or paleoanthropologist. Natural selection, which works by restricting reproduction or by out-and-out killing, is conspicuously indifferent to the happiness of humans and other life forms. In fact, suffering, death, disease, and predation are essential ingredients in the evolutionary process. I can't think of a single species that does not eat or get eaten by another species. A good God would never invent evolution except under duress. Survival of the fittest as a construction paradigm must be a bitter pill for anyone who craves the love of a paternalistic God. Atheism seems more amenable to the realization that we're all small animals living together in a tough universe, and that it's therefore imperative that we love and care for one another.
Imagine a hypothetical world in which only God exists. Since God is perfect and there's nothing else in this hypothetical world is perfect. It can't get any better. It also can't get any worse. There's no logical pathway from such a perfect world to a less than perfect world. A perfect God would never corrupt or lessen the perfection of the world by creating anything imperfect. According to Matthew chapter 7, verse 18, a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. NIV. This passage concerns physical probabilities. My argument, similar to that expressed by philosopher Graham Oppy, is much stronger because it's about logical possibility, not mere physical probability. Potential excuses for evil are irrelevant. No good features that we discover in an imperfect world can ever make that imperfect world as good as the total perfection of the original God-only world. The scientific method is the antithesis of faith. Science prioritizes facts, whereas faith prioritizes dogma. If you accept science, but only up to the point where you defer to faith, you don't accept science. You accept only selected findings of science. Genuinely accepting science requires applying its methods and practices, irrespective of how you feel about the results.
No one who thinks with any degree of philosophical sophistication, hell, no one who thinks better than a tipsy titmouse, thinks in terms of inerrant sources of knowledge. To claim inerrancy is to preemptively dismiss all contrary evidence. We need to acknowledge the real danger we face. Claims of inerrancy pose an existential threat to any discursive in democratic civilization founded on the principles of open debate. Nobody has ever credibly reported seeing a soul, or hearing, touching, or licking one. If you are willing to believe without evidence that you have a soul, you might as well believe you have 17.4 souls, each connected to the others at a perfect right angle using titanium rivets. We can't help but wonder why supposedly all-knowing beings struggle to communicate in clear, unambiguous terms. Gods tend to talk to their followers using metaphor, poetic language, secret codes, signs, and parables. I don't want to be insulting, but from what I have seen of religious believers, these are the last people on earth who should be expected to solve riddles. Carl Sagan popularized the quote, "Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence." Some people, including Sagan himself, have insisted that absence of evidence can, under some circumstances, be evidence of absence. What is intended, it seems, is this. If proposition P were true, evidence E would be observable. But since evidence E is not observable, proposition P must be false. In other words, if P, then Q, not Q, therefore not P. This form of deductive argument is known as modus tollens, a standard syllogistic form. Thus, while the statement absence of evidence is evidence of absence is literally false, it's a grammatical error rather than a conceptual blunder. When evidence for an event should be present but is not, that is evidence that the event did not occur. We Homo sapiens have survived largely because we are innately programmed with a deep psychological imperative to seek explanations. I can't imagine any evolutionarily cogent reason why our curiosity would ever get switched off, or why we would ever be content to accept that no deeper explanation exists. An irrepressible hunger for an explanation, plus an absence of evidence upon which to construct a compelling explanation, does not add up to a divine explanation. It instead culminates in the kind of frustration that plagues every inquisitive mortal until he either dies or becomes sufficiently sloppy in his reasoning that he fancies that he has solved the mystery.
The Mormon Guide to Self-Control offers this advice. When the temptation to masturbate is strong, yell "stop" to those thoughts as loudly as you can in your mind, then recite a portion of the Bible or sing a hymn. Owing to this passage, every time I observe a little old lady reading the Bible or singing a hymn, I presume that she would rather be masturbating.
A fundamental discrepancy lurks at the heart of the fine-tuning argument. If an all-powerful God created the universe specifically for humans, why did he need to meticulously fiddle with the universal constants, such as the strength of gravity and the weak nuclear force, to make an isolated smattering of human life possible? Why was such painstaking effort at tweaking required? It's as though God fumbled miserably on his initial stab at making a hospitable universe, but rather than admit he messed up, he went to extraordinary effort to jury-rig something that would nominally get the job done. I once hired a handyman who worked like that. He was on pot.